Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 369. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Got some news to talk about in today's show, but I want to first take a moment and just thank everybody who donated to the Libertarian Institute Fund Drive. We hit our goal, and that's because we have a lot of generous donors who come in and, make sure that we could keep doing what we're doing here. I'm, writing news stories every week, putting out this podcast, putting out the news roundup. So, everybody who is helping to make sure that could continue to happen, I really, really do appreciate it. Also, just want to mention for anybody else, just sharing the show is a huge help. So whether you find it at the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version. You can follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. But however you find the show, just please put it out there so we could try to get some new listeners tuned in the new year. With that, I am going to hop into the news. The first article I have today: Biden to expand Trump-era policy to expel migrants at southern border. And I put this out with Will Porter on January 5th. The White House has rolled out an updated immigration policy, unveiling plans to strengthen rules developed under the Donald Trump administration to quickly deport migrants who attempt to enter through the country's border with Mexico. President Joe Biden outlined the new policy in a speech on Thursday morning, imploring migrants not to come to the U.S. without following the proper procedures while stressing the need for a safe and orderly process. My message is this: if you are trying to leave Cuba, Nicaragua, or Haiti, do not just show up at the border. Stay where you are and apply legally from there, he said, vowing to stiffen enforcement for those who try to come without a legal right to stay. The Department of Homeland Security later explained that the border agencies will expand their use of Title VIII deportations as the Biden administration seeks to phase out separate authorities under Title 42, which were first invoked by Trump in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The new rules will allow the government to expel anyone entering the U.S. who does not claim asylum for fear of being seriously harmed, with DHS saying that it would hence expedite removals under Title VIII authorities for those who cannot be processed under the Title 42 healthcare order. Migrants expelled under Title VIII will be forbidden from entering the U.S. for a period of 5 years. And if they do, I think a felony actually, but it's a pretty serious, under U.S. statutes, it's a fairly serious crime to violate that law. Individuals without a legal basis to remain in the United States will be subject to prompt expulsion or removal, DHS Chief Alejandro Mayorkas said. The White House will also allocate additional resources for personnel, transportation, and facilities to help remove anyone in the U.S. illegally, and will work to improve coordination between Homeland, the Department of Justice, and the State Department. Moreover, the DHS said it would roll out a mobile app allowing asylum seekers to apply before arriving at American ports of entry, hoping to discourage non-citizens from congregating near the borders in unsafe conditions. The Biden plan requires migrants who pass through a third country to apply for asylum in that country and not the United States. A similar policy under Trump, known as the Remain in Mexico rule, was condemned as illegal and xenophobic by critics. On the 2020 campaign trail, Biden attacked Trump's border policies as harmful to desperate migrants, saying he slammed the door shut in the faces of families fleeing persecution and violence. The then candidate pledged to eliminate President Trump's decision to limit asylum on day one of his administration. And you can see here he's actually retweeting his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, who tweeted out a video that condemned the Remain in Mexico policy and stiffening the claims that you need to make to get asylum. I think unless you're say you're facing murder or torture, essentially you're not allowed to stay under the Trump and now Biden rules. During Thursday's speech, Biden said most migrants arriving at the American southern border are coming from Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Haiti, suggesting internal problems in those countries were to blame for the massive uptick in immigration to the U.S. However, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua are each subject to heavy U.S. sanctions, exacerbating their country's economic troubles and in some cases preventing imports of certain key goods. Haiti, meanwhile, has descended into chaos over the past 18 months in the wake of the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse, seeing intermittent clashes between armed gangs and government forces, while the U.S. pushed for politician Ariel Henry to assume power in Port-au-Prince. The interim leader, Henry, has failed to control the rampant gang violence and has actually been accused of being involved in Moïse's murder. So, I guess a few things here. I was not supportive of Trump's immigration policy. If you look back and, my conversations on the show was a lot of it around the foreign policy angle, which is where I mainly want to focus here. But, even at the time, the idea that we're going to stiffen, particularly these Latin American countries that have been, and the Middle Eastern countries of Trump's initial, ban. I think it was 8 countries: Sudan, Iraq, Iran, maybe not Iraq, but Sudan, Iran, and Syria, a few other countries, that the war had been, the U.S. had bombed under the Obama administration. Trump allowing the people not to come was seen as the great catastrophe to much of the, left wing of the American political spectrum, or whoever votes Democrat, let's say that. While it was pretty clear that their outrage was very selective, Obama spent 8 years killing these people, and now Trump doesn't let him in, and now you're going to have a meltdown and say the policies are xenophobic and he doesn't care and all of that. Now, I guess, at the time, I also point out that Trump's border policies didn't seem that far off of Obama's. Now, he did take some other steps and things like that, but, as far as the amount of deportations and things like that going on, and the tactics of deportation are mostly the same under the two administrations, and it's largely carried over and, expanded under the Biden administration. I think the most important point here for me, though, to make is Cuba has been subject to a 60-plus year embargo by the United States. The worst thing happening on the Cuban island is the U.S.-run torture prison on the U.S.-occupied portion of that island. So, those are things to consider when we have the sanctions and when we're condemning the Cubans. Venezuela, I'll have a little bit more on in a second. Nicaragua has, been subject to a little bit more of a low-key economic sanctions regime. It's not as prominent. We don't talk about it in the same way as, say, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela. There's a couple other countries, maybe Syria, that, are subject to the true maximum pressure sanctions. But because of the heavy amount of business between Nicaragua and the U.S., it has really impacted. The U.S. does have a legacy of, adding to the violence in that country. And then Haiti is the one that we've covered the most on this show, maybe Venezuela too, but particularly Haiti. We have covered a lot on this show in the wake of, I think it was July 7th of 2021 that Jovenel Moïse was assassinated in Haiti. And, at the time, there's a lot of speculation that the Americans are behind it. And it turns out there's Colombian military and a few other Haitians that are, likely are actually known to be involved. Whoever is actually behind this is still a little bit of a question mark. I think it's pretty clear that the Colombians were more mercenary types and not taking out Moïse for some kind of ideological bent. But no matter who's ultimately behind this, after his assassination, Claude Joseph initially assumed power, but was chased out by the United States in an international coalition, and Ariel Henry was pushed into the leadership role. Now, there was some arguments for Henry to assume that position. It's not like this was completely... But no matter what... So since Henry's taken over, the country has really devolved into chaos. Gangs run the capital city. And it's to the point where, this I think happened last summer, where there's a generator that's on the back of a flatbed truck. This isn't like, one that powers a house. This one that powers a hospital was going to a children's hospital. And, the crime problem is so serious there that this was actually stolen. They're stealing loads off of flatbed trucks, entire generators and things like that. So the man that the U.S. has put in charge of Haiti is absolutely leading the country down a very dark path. He's unable to prevent the rampant gang violence in the country. And so at this point, it seems that a lot of the chaos in Haiti is America's fault. They've talked about in the past several months putting together an international UN coalition to go into Haiti and to try to get control of the gang problem, which will likely probably exacerbate the situation and not make it any better. Now, on Venezuela, over the past 4 years now, the U.S. has backed this guy named Juan Guaido as the leader of the country. He's held no power in the country. He doesn't have any real popular recognition. He's tried a couple different times to, charge up a coup against the Venezuelan, elected leader Nicolas Maduro, and it has just gone nowhere. So the State Department said on Tuesday that the U.S. approach towards Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is not changing, and said the crippling economic sanctions on the South American country will remain. The comments came after Maduro said Venezuela was ready to work towards normalization with the U.S., and Venezuelans' opposition voted to dissolve the interim government and remove Juan Guaido as the interim president. The U.S. recognition of Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela in 2019 after rejecting the results of the 2018 election that saw Maduro secure another term as president. The U.S. also backed a failed coup against Maduro and ramped up sanctions that have done little but to hurt ordinary Venezuelans. The U.S. also didn't recognize the 2020 parliamentary elections, and the opposition that the U.S. bats is a part of the National Assembly that was elected in 2015 but didn't hold power in Venezuela anymore. Despite rallies in the capital, the U.S. and its allies have granted the opposition National Assembly control over Venezuela's offshore assets. We continue to recognize that the only remaining democratically elected institution in Venezuela today, and that's the 2015 National Assembly, Price said when asked about sanctions. Price said our overall Venezuela related sanctions and related restrictions remain in place. When dissolving the interim government, Venezuela's opposition said it would not create a new body to oversee offshore assets. I understand that members of the National Assembly are discussing amongst themselves how to oversee the overseas assets. While Price insists it's business as usual when it comes to Venezuela, the U.S. has eased sanctions very slightly after Maduro resumed talks with the opposition in November. The U.S. granted a license to Chevron to resume pumping oil in Venezuela and agreed to release $3 billion in Venezuelan funds that were frozen by the U.S. and European banks. Under the deal, the U.S. funds will go towards humanitarian and economic development projects. And so, we've seen a little curtailing of the policy in Venezuela, but, as I've talked about in the show in the past, if we're looking at doing a deal with a government that is currently on the enemy list of the official foreign policy establishment, I think a president has to get that done before there's 2 years left in his administration. I'm assuming Biden isn't going to be reelected in 2024. I think with his age and everything, it's probably on the unlikely side, although not impossible. But assuming, and I'm not saying that like he doesn't run, another Democrat doesn't get elected, but even then, I think that you have to, have this policy working for a couple of years, not just developing it in a couple of years, but actually working for a couple of years so the business interests are strong enough to really compete against the foreign policy establishment interests. And so, had he started this right when he became president, then, maybe by now we're looking at a economic situation developing between the U.S. and Venezuela that in 2 years at the end of Biden's term is actually strong enough to withstand the, new personnel that comes in that's more hawkish on the situation, it seems too late at this point. Next article, I wrote this for a Libertarian Institute. Zelensky expands crackdown on Ukrainian media. President Volodymyr Zelensky has signed a new bill into law which strengthens government control over public access to news in Ukraine. Zelensky has already nationalized the country's media under martial law powers invoked after Russia's invasion last year, stoking criticisms from press freedom groups. On December 29th, he signed the law that expanded Ukraine's broadcast regulatory powers over news agencies dramatically, now including both print and online sources, including to the Kiev Independent. The measure requires publications to obtain licenses to operate, and any media organization without the proper paperwork can be shut down, the outlet reported, and that the body handing out the permits will be under Zelensky's control. And this is a quote from the Kiev Independent, which is a very pro-Kiev newspaper. According to Ukraine's Institute of Mass Information, under the law, the media regulator is likely to be controlled by the incumbent authorities because its members are appointed by Zelensky and the Ukrainian parliament, where his party has an absolute majority, and one that is in place by his own decree. The opposition parties in Ukraine are now effectively banned. In March, Zelensky issued a presidential decree which nationalized Ukraine's broadcast media, stressing the need for a unified information policy to combat Russian disinformation and voices critical of the government. Around the same time, he also banned a long list of opposition political parties with alleged links to Russia, and has since taken punitive actions against the Orthodox churches, which are said to have ties with Moscow, effectively quashing all dissent under martial law powers. While Zelensky's power grab through the 11th month conflict have largely gone unnoted in the American mainstream press, which has been devoting ample coverage to similar wartime repression in Russia, the New York Times highlighted calls from human rights groups to rescind the law over fears it will crush the free press. Ukraine will demonstrate its European commitment by promoting a free and independent media, not by establishing state controls of information. Rodrigo Gutierrez, the Secretary General for the European Federation of Journalists, said the Committee to Protect Journalists and Other Civil Rights Orgs also slammed the legislation while it was being debated by lawmakers in December. While Ukraine's legislature agreed to strip away some of the bill's more extreme measures, the final draft still has the federal government near total control over Ukraine's news media. And this, of course, I think is so important to highlight, because so much of the conversation around Ukraine is how great Zelensky is. This is a democracy. He's promoting freedom. He's promoting American values, when clearly that is not what's happening here. Zelensky is a tyrant. He has used this war to consolidate powers under martial laws. And while you can look at this and say, it's a war and everything, he's not going to give this back. And remember, a lot of the complaints of the people in Ukraine who are seeking to join Russia in the Donbass region, in Crimea, stemmed from anti-Russian laws passed in Kiev after the 2014 coup there. And Zelensky has taken that and just turned the dial up to 10. So this is likely going to prevent any kind of reunification of Ukraine from ever occurring. Even with military dominance, the people who live in the primarily Russian areas will likely never stop fighting, because they'll see the Ukrainian soldiers as the occupiers, not the liberators. All right, now let's talk about some weapons going to Ukraine. France says it pledged AMX-10 RC light tanks to Ukraine. This from Dave DeCamp on January 4th. French President Macron said Wednesday that he told Ukrainians President Zelensky that Paris will provide Kiev with AMX-10 RC armored combat vehicles as Ukraine has been seeking Western-made tanks. A French official said that AMX-10 RC vehicles will be the first time Western-made armor vehicles are being delivered in support of the Ukrainian army, but the armor vehicles fall short of the heavier tanks that Zelensky has been asking for, such as U.S.-made Abrams tanks. The AMX-10, which France describes as a light tank, was built in the 1980s and is being phased out by the French military. The vehicle is lightweight and on 6 wheels as opposed to trats that heavier tanks have, but the AMX-10 is equipped with a powerful 105 millimeter gun. And so you can see it kind of looks like a tiny, cheaply built tank if you're watching and can see the picture here. Now, we also have an announcement of a new U.S. weapons package. U.S. to send Ukraine Bradley fighting vehicles in nearly $3 billion arms package. The U.S. is going to send Ukraine Bradley fighting vehicles for the first time in a new weapons package worth nearly $3 billion, U.S. officials told the AP on Thursday. The official said that the $2.85 billion aid package $2.85 billion aid package will be formally announced on Friday and will mark the single largest arms package for Ukraine the U.S. has pledged at one time. The package will include 50 Bradleys, which are designed to transport infantry troops with armored protection, are equipped with a 25 millimeter gun. If anybody's watching the video, you can see a picture of one of these systems here. This looks like a slightly more well-equipped tank, although similarly to the past story, it does fall short of the Abrams tanks that Zelensky has been looking for. The White House confirmed the U.S. will be providing the Bradleys in a statement on the phone call between Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The statement said that Berlin will be supplying Kiev with similar pieces of equipment, the German-made Marder infantry fighting vehicles. The announcement came the day after France said it would be giving Ukraine AMX-10s. So, more weapons for peace. This is the call of NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. He said, "It may sound like a paradox, but military support for Ukraine is the fastest way to peace." Stoltenberg told the German news agency DPA, "We know that most wars end at the negotiating table, probably this war too, but we know that what Ukraine can achieve in these negotiations depend on the military situation." Stoltenberg's comments come and there is no indication that Ukraine and Russia will come to the negotiating table. Kiev maintains that its goal is to push Russia out all of its territory captured, including Crimea, while Moscow vows not to leave any of the areas that it has annexed. Now, maybe a little bit of good news here. Erdogan tells Putin he wants to mediate a lasting peace in Ukraine. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan told the Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday and said that he wants Ankara to mediate a peace between Moscow and Kiev. Now, I guess the good news here is Erdogan has been pretty tactful throughout this war. The fact that this war almost ended in March, April was due to Turkish intervention. And so, that's a reason to be optimistic about this. I think Turkey maintains a relationship, certainly with Moscow, but also with Kiev to some extent. And so if Erdogan is publicly floating this, maybe he feels that he has received signals, not necessarily just through conversations that he's had either with Putin or Zelensky, but, through the foreign ministers and the other Turkish diplomats, that at least Russia, but maybe to Ukraine, are actually interested in talks, and that's why he's kind of reviving this idea at this time. So Erdogan told Putin that any offer for peace should include a unilateral ceasefire to facilitate negotiations. Later in the day, Putin ordered a unilateral ceasefire for the Christian Orthodox Christmas on Saturday, but it's not clear if it will hold as it has been rejected by Kiev. So I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. And so anyways, I think it's possible that, something could develop from here. It's probably going to take a few months, right? This isn't something that's going to happen quickly. I guess it's kind of a shame that, the U.S. and Ukraine maybe didn't take Russia up on that ceasefire, just because that could be the start, the few, just beginning minutes that you need, the foot in the door that you need to get these negotiations underway. But at the same time, it's very possible that this is a move by Russia for PR reasons, right? It's a little PR win to declare a ceasefire for, Christmas, right? And everything like that. I think the issue is how short of time before the ceasefire that Russia announced it, and the military situation going on, for Russia, and probably this is the way it's seen in Ukraine and the U.S., that, this is just a quick chance to allow their troops to get some food, to get some rest before they actually, start serious fighting again. So, I don't know. I kind of wish that the U.S. really would have pushed Ukraine to take them up on this ceasefire. But at the same time, it may not have even been that serious of an offer by Russia. Now, in their New Year's addresses, Putin and Zelensky vowed to both keep fighting. So it does seem to me that, in Moscow, in Kiev right now, 95% of the time is spent on war planning, and maybe there's slight discussion about what we could do for talks, but nobody seems really interested in it at this point. And from both sides, you can make arguments as to why they, shouldn't pursue negotiations. For Russia, it's pretty clear that every time they've pursued negotiations with Ukraine, Western leaders have instead hijacked those negotiations for whatever they felt would give them the better upper hand over Russia in the years to come. Where from the Ukrainian side, if somebody invades your country and then looks to negotiate, you could feel like, well, even if we settle and make a deal now, what's to keep Russia from invading again in 2 or 3 years and taking just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more of Ukraine? So there's arguments against negotiations on both sides. However, I think Turkey has shown itself to be a pretty practical and balanced negotiator here. And so I hope that, both sides will consider at least engaging in these talks. All right, now last story up today. 101st Airborne still deployed in Romania, simulating war with Russia. About 4,000 members of the U.S. Army's 104th Airborne Division are still deployed in Romania as a part of a U.S. military buildup in Eastern Europe that President Biden ordered last year. As the Pentagon is still deciding whether to maintain current troop levels, the New York Times reported on Tuesday that some 101st soldiers are stationed at a base near Romanian city of Constanta on the Black Sea, while others are further north, just a few miles from the Ukrainian border, and they are simulating fighting Russia in Ukraine. This is a story that I had written up a few months ago, and this is pretty notable, I think, that, these exercises are occurring in regions not too far from the Russian border, and exactly what the U.S. is trying to achieve and do here is to train Ukrainian troops to kill Russians, which I'm sure is seen as highly provocative in Moscow. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back with more shows next week.